The storm hit harder than Felix Montgomery had anticipated. Sheets of rain battered against his windshield as his sleek black Aston Martin skidded across the slick highway. He gritted his teeth, tightening his grip on the wheel, but it was useless. The tires lost traction, and before he could regain control, the car spun violently off the road. The impact was jarring. His heart pounded as he sat there, gripping the wheel, his breath coming fast. Outside, the rain poured relentlessly, blurring the world beyond the cracked windshield. The car was done for. Felix exhaled sharply and raked a hand through his damp hair. This night was not going as planned. He had been driving to his private estate upstate, needing an escape from the ruthless world of billion-dollar negotiations and suffocating expectations. But now, stranded in the middle of nowhere, his options were severely limited. His sharp gaze landed on a flickering neon sign a short distance away. Rosewood Inn. A small roadside motel barely visible through the downpour. It wasn't exactly the five-star accommodations he was used to, but it would have to do. Pulling his coat over his head, he pushed the door open and stepped into the storm. The cold rain soaked through his clothes in seconds as he made his way toward the motel, his expensive Italian leather shoes squelching against the wet pavement. The lobby was dimly lit, the scent of fresh coffee and vanilla lingering in the air. The place was old but well-maintained, with wooden floors and a cozy fireplace crackling in the corner. Felix ran a hand through his wet hair, his patience wearing thin. And then he saw her. Behind the reception desk stood the most unexpectedly captivating woman he had ever laid eyes on. Her auburn hair was pulled into a messy bun, wisps escaping to frame her delicate face. She looked up from her book, her hazel eyes widening slightly as she took him in, soaked, disheveled, and visibly irritated. "Rough night?" she asked, setting her book down. Felix exhaled, resisting the urge to roll his eyes. "You could say that." She tilted her head, studying him with an amused expression. "Let me guess." "Your fancy car didn't handle the storm too well." Felix arched a brow. "You assume it's fancy," she shrugged. "You don't exactly look like the kind of guy who drives a beat-up pickup." Despite himself, the corner of his mouth twitched. She wasn't wrong. She grabbed a key from the rack behind her and placed it on the counter. "Room 3. It's the best one we've got." "Not exactly the Ritz, but it won't leak on you." Felix reached into his wallet, pulling out a crisp $100 bill. "I'll take it." She raised an eyebrow but didn't reach for the money. "Cash only." Felix stared at her. "You're joking." "Nope, card machine's down thanks to the storm." He let out an exasperated sigh, running a hand down his face. "I don't carry cash." "Well," she said, folding her arms, "then I guess you're out of luck." Felix narrowed his eyes. No one ever denied him anything. He was used to people bending over backward to accommodate him. But this woman, she didn't even seem fazed. "I'll pay triple once the storm clears," he said. She leaned against the counter, clearly unimpressed. "And how do I know you're good for it?" Felix let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Do I look like someone who can't afford a motel room?" She tapped her chin thoughtfully. "You look like someone who's used to getting his way." His patience was wearing thin, but before he could argue, she sighed. "Fine, you can stay." "But you owe me breakfast in the morning." Felix blinked. "Excuse me," she grinned. "That's the deal. You don't have cash, so you buy me breakfast. Take it or leave it." It was absurd. But he had no other options. With a resigned sigh, he grabbed the key. "Fine," she smirked. "Welcome to Rosewood Inn." Felix turned toward the hall, shaking his head as he walked away. He had no idea why he agreed to this ridiculous deal. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that she was the first person in years to challenge him without fear. Whatever it was, he had the strangest feeling that this night was about to change everything. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting a golden hue over the modest motel room. Felix Montgomery sat at the small wooden table, his hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee. The mattress had been far from the plush comfort he was accustomed to, but surprisingly, he had slept soundly. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe it was something else. The scent of fresh pastries drifted through the air, reminding him of his unusual agreement with the woman at the front desk. He still didn't know her name, yet she had managed to get him to agree to breakfast like it was the most natural thing in the world. He threw on his coat and stepped into the hallway. The storm had passed, leaving behind damp pavement and a crisp morning breeze. The small diner attached to the motel was already bustling with activity. Locals filled the booths, chatting over steaming mugs of coffee and plates of eggs. Felix spotted her near the counter, wiping down a table with practiced ease. She glanced up, catching sight of him. "You're up," she noted, tossing the rag over her shoulder. "I was starting to think you'd sneak out and avoid paying up." Felix took a seat across from her usual spot. "I keep my word." She set a menu in front of him, though she didn't need to. "Then I'll have blueberry pancakes." Felix raised an eyebrow. "You didn't even look at the options." She shrugged. "I own the place, I know what's good." That caught his attention. "You own this place," she nodded. "Inherited it from my parents, been running it ever since." Felix studied her, intrigued. She couldn't have been much older than 30, yet she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent years keeping things afloat. He signaled the waitress, ordering both their meals. "So what's your name?" She rested her chin on her hand as if debating. Eden, it suited her, simple yet unforgettable. "You don't seem surprised that I'm a billionaire," he noted, sipping his coffee. Eden's lips quirked. "I saw the watch." "People don't wear something like that unless they've got more money than they know what to do with." Felix glanced at his wrist. He hadn't even thought about it. "And yet, you still made me pay with breakfast." "Just because you're rich doesn't mean you get a free pass," Eden said lightly. "Besides, I like seeing people work for things every once in a while." Felix couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to him like this. Most people either flattered him or feared him. Eden did neither. Their food arrived, and for a moment they ate in comfortable silence. Felix found himself watching her more than he should. She carried herself with an effortless grace, completely at ease in her world. After finishing her last bite, she leaned back. "So, what's next for you?" "Heading back to your empire," Felix exhaled slowly, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "Probably." Eden tilted her head. "You don't sound thrilled about it." He wasn't. But admitting that to a woman he had just met felt too revealing. Instead, he set his cup down and met her gaze. "And what about you?" "Is this where you see yourself forever?" Eden smiled, but there was something wistful in it. "Maybe, maybe not. But for now, it's mine." Felix had spent years building his fortune, commanding boardrooms, and making decisions that impacted thousands of people. Yet, sitting here in a small town diner, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: peace. And he wasn't sure he was ready to leave it behind just yet. Felix didn't leave. At first, he told himself it was just for an extra night. His car needed repairs, and the storm had left the roads in less than ideal condition. But as the hours stretched into another full day, he found himself lingering in the quiet, unexpected comfort of Rosewood Inn. Eden didn't question it. She went about her usual routine, managing the front desk, checking on guests, and occasionally disappearing into the small office behind the lobby. Felix observed her in ways he wasn't used to observing people, not as a potential business deal or a means to an end, but simply as she was. She moved with quiet determination, her mind constantly occupied with a dozen things at once, yet she never seemed overwhelmed. He had spent years surrounded by people who demanded his attention, who orchestrated every moment of his life for efficiency and control. Here, in this small town motel, there were no expectations. No one whispered about his wealth, no one tried to impress him, and Eden. She treated him like he was just another guest. The third morning, Felix found himself behind the front desk, leaning against the counter as Eden flipped through a stack of invoices. "You look like you could use another set of hands," he commented. She didn't glance up. "You looking for a job?" Felix huffed a quiet laugh. I don't think you could afford me. Eden finally met his gaze, her expression thoughtful. Maybe not, but I could use someone to carry a few boxes from the storage room. Felix raised an eyebrow. You're seriously putting me to work. You're still here, she pointed out. Might as well make yourself useful. Felix wasn't sure why he agreed. Maybe it was the challenge in her tone, or maybe it was the way she acted, like she didn't care who he was or how much money he had. Either way, he followed her through the narrow hallway toward the storage room at the back of the building. The space was cramped, filled with neatly stacked supplies and extra linens. Eden gestured toward a set of boxes near the door. Those need to go to the supply closet near the lobby, she said. Felix rolled up his sleeves. You put all your guests to work, or am I just special? Eden leaned against the doorframe. You're the only one who's still here after 3 days with no real reason to be. Felix didn't have a response for that. He lifted one of the boxes, surprised by its weight. What's in these bricks? Shampoo bottles, Eden said, amused. Felix muttered something under his breath and carried the box back toward the front of the inn. When he set it down, he turned to find Eden watching him, arms crossed. You don't seem like the type who's used to manual labor, she mused. Felix dusted off his hands. I run a company, not a construction site. Eden tilted her head slightly. And yet, you're still here carrying boxes for a motel owner. Felix didn't know how to explain it. He had every reason to leave. His car was fixed, his absence from his company was growing more noticeable, and yet, something about this place, about her, made it hard to walk away. Before he could say anything, the front door swung open, and an older man stepped inside, shaking off the morning chill. He spotted Eden and grinned. Morning, kid, the man greeted. Hey, Frank, Eden said warmly. Felix watched as Eden moved around the counter, grabbing a small envelope and handing it to the man. Got your room set up for the weekend, she said. Usual rate. Frank nodded, slipping the envelope into his pocket before his gaze landed on Felix. New employee, Eden laughed. Not exactly. Felix extended a hand. Felix Montgomery. Frank shook it firmly. Frank Dawson, I've been coming here for years. He glanced at Eden. She runs a good place. Felix didn't doubt that. After Frank disappeared down the hall, Eden turned back to Felix, her expression unreadable. You're not used to places like this, are you? Felix considered his answer. No. But that doesn't mean I don't appreciate them. Eden studied him for a moment before nodding. Good. Felix wasn't sure what that meant, but he had the feeling it was important. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't in a rush to figure it out. Felix wasn't sure when it had happened. When the quiet admiration had turned into something deeper, something undeniable. Maybe it was the way Eden moved through her world with such quiet strength, or the way she challenged him without hesitation, never once treating him like anything more than a man who had stumbled into her life by accident. But it was there now, pressing against his ribs every time she looked at him. Another evening settled over Rosewood Inn, the last streaks of sunlight casting warm shadows through the windows. Felix found himself outside, leaning against the wooden railing of the small porch, watching Eden as she locked up the front office for the night. She glanced up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. You're still here. It wasn't a question. Felix exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Yeah. Eden stepped closer, folding her arms as she studied him. Why? He could have given her a dozen reasons, excuses that would have made sense, but none of them would have been the truth. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing against hers where they rested on the railing. It was the first time he had touched her, and even though it was barely anything, it sent something electric through his veins. I think you know why, he said quietly. Eden didn't pull away. Her gaze held his, searching, questioning, but not rejecting. It was the first moment of stillness they had shared, where the air between them was heavy with something unspoken but understood. She took a slow breath, her fingers curling slightly against his. Felix. He knew what she was about to say, knew that she was going to remind him of the life waiting for him beyond this town. beyond this small motel that had somehow become the only place he wanted to be. So he did the only thing that made sense. He closed the distance between them and kissed her. It wasn't hesitant or uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that left no room for doubt, no space for second guessing. Eden melted into him, her hands gripping the front of his shirt as he deepened the kiss, as if he could somehow bridge the impossible gap between their worlds with nothing but the way he held her. When they finally broke apart, her breath was uneven, her eyes searching his. This can't be real. Felix cupped her face, his thumb tracing the edge of her jaw. It is. She shook her head slightly, as if trying to convince herself of something. You don't belong here. Felix's grip tightened just a fraction. Maybe I don't belong anywhere else. Eden swallowed, her fingers still fisted in his shirt. And what happens when the world comes calling? When you remember who you are, Felix knew she had every right to doubt him. He was a man used to power and control, to making decisions that shaped industries and empires. But none of that had ever made him feel the way she did. I don't want to leave, he admitted, the words tasting like a confession. Eden studied him, her expression unreadable. Then slowly, she leaned in again, pressing her forehead against his. Then don't, she whispered. And for the first time in his life, Felix Montgomery had no intention of walking away from what he truly wanted. Felix wasn't sure what he had expected after kissing Eden, but it wasn't the quiet certainty that settled in his chest. There was no hesitation in his decision to stay, no gnawing sense of obligation pulling him back to his old life. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about boardroom meetings or billion-dollar contracts. He was thinking about her. The next morning, he found her in the small garden behind the motel, tending to the row of potted herbs lined up along the wooden fence. She didn't look up when he approached, but he could tell she was aware of him. You don't strike me as someone with a green thumb, he said, watching as she carefully pruned a rosemary plant. Eden finally glanced at him, the faintest trace of amusement in her eyes. And you don't strike me as someone who gets his hands dirty, yet here you are, hanging around a small town motel like you belong here. Felix leaned against the fence, considering her words. Maybe I do. She wiped her hands on a cloth, studying him. Felix. He knew that tone. It was cautious, hesitant. She was trying to protect herself, to keep the inevitable heartbreak at bay. But he wasn't going to let her shut him out. I meant what I said, he interrupted before she could voice her doubts. I don't want to leave. Eden exhaled, setting down her cloth. And what happens when you wake up one morning and realize this isn't enough for you? That you miss the city, the deals, the control. Felix reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. What if I don't? Her expression faltered, and for the first time he saw a vulnerability in her that she had tried so hard to hide. She wanted to believe him, but she was afraid. He squeezed her hand gently. I don't make decisions lightly, Eden. When I want something, I don't walk away from it. She searched his face, looking for any sign of uncertainty. When she found none, she nodded slowly. I don't need promises you can't keep, Felix. Good, he said, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. Because I don't make promises I can't keep. Eden exhaled and let herself lean into him just slightly. It was enough. Later that afternoon, Felix found himself helping her fix a loose porch railing, something he normally would have paid someone else to do. But there was something oddly satisfying about working with his hands, about seeing immediate results from his effort. As he tightened the last screw, Eden handed him a glass of iced tea, watching as he tested the stability of the railing. Not bad for a billionaire, she mused. Felix took a sip of the tea, letting the cold sweetness settle on his tongue. Not bad for a motel owner, she laughed, and the sound settled something deep inside him. For the first time in years, Felix Montgomery wasn't thinking about what came next. He was just here with her, and for once, that was enough. Felix had spent his life making decisions with ruthless precision. He had built an empire by trusting his instincts, by knowing when to walk away and when to fight. And yet, standing in the warm glow of Eden's motel, He realized something unsettling. This was the first time he was making a choice based purely on feeling. No calculations, no strategy. Just the certainty that he wasn't ready to leave. As the days passed, his presence at Rosewood Inn became less of an anomaly and more of an unspoken reality. He helped Eden when she let him, fixed things around the property, and even started recognizing the regular guests who came through. It was a rhythm unlike anything he had known before, one that didn't revolve around power, wealth, or control. But the world he had left behind hadn't forgotten him. Felix was sitting on the motel's front steps, watching the sun dip below the horizon, when his phone buzzed for the first time in days. He had ignored the previous calls, but this one bore a name he couldn't ignore. Graham Langford, his company's legal counsel and one of the few people Felix actually trusted. He exhaled and answered. "You're alive," Graham said dryly. "That's a relief." Felix rubbed his temple. "What do you want?" "What do I want? The board wants to know if you've lost your mind. You disappeared in the middle of a major acquisition. Your executives are scrambling, and the press is starting to ask questions." Felix's jaw tightened. He had known this moment would come, but he hadn't expected the weight of it to feel so foreign. "I needed time," he said simply. Graham was silent for a moment. "Time for what?" Felix's gaze drifted toward the motel's office window. Inside, Eden was balancing the books, her brow furrowed in concentration. She didn't know he was on the phone, didn't realize that with every second he spoke to Graham, the world he had tried to escape was clawing its way back in. "I don't know yet," Felix admitted. "Well, figure it out fast," Graham said. "Because if you don't return soon, the board will assume you've abandoned ship. And I don't have to tell you what that means." Felix ended the call without another word. The weight of his past pressed against his chest, but when Eden stepped outside a moment later, wiping her hands on a towel, the pressure eased. "Everything okay?" she asked. Felix pushed his phone into his pocket. "It will be." She studied him for a beat, then nodded. "Good. Because if you're done brooding out here, I could use a second opinion in the kitchen." Felix followed her inside, letting himself be swallowed by the warmth of the space. The conversation with Graham lingered at the back of his mind, but as Eden handed him a spoon and told him to taste the sauce she was making, the urgency of his old world felt distant. That night, as they stood by the fire pit she had set up behind the motel, Felix realized something. He wasn't afraid of losing his company. He was afraid of losing this. The next morning, Felix made a decision. He walked into the office where Eden was sorting through receipts and leaned against the desk. "I need to go back," he said, watching her reaction carefully. Eden stilled for half a second before nodding. "I figured." Felix reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "But I'm coming back." Eden's lips parted slightly, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Felix, I don't want to leave this behind," he said firmly, "but I need to handle things first. I need to make sure my company doesn't fall apart, that the people who depend on me aren't left stranded." Eden searched his face, her fingers tightening around his. "And then what?" He took a deep breath. "Then I come back, for good." Her breath hitched. "You're serious?" Felix nodded. "I don't make decisions lightly, Eden. And I've never been more sure of anything in my life." A long silence stretched between them before Eden exhaled, a slow, measured breath. Then, to his relief, she smiled. "Then go," she said softly, "and don't take too long." Felix returned to the city with a purpose. The moment he walked into his office, the tension was palpable. His executives were waiting, files and reports stacked high, questions swirling in the air. But Felix handled it the way he handled everything, with precision and control. He spent days restructuring, delegating, ensuring that, for the first time in his life, the company could function without him at the helm every second. He made the necessary calls, finalized deals, and put the right people in place. And then, when there was nothing left tying him down, he left. Not in the middle of the night, not with unfinished business. He left on his own terms with a clear conscience and a heart that knew exactly where it belonged. When Felix pulled up to Rosewood Inn a week later, Eden was standing on the porch, arms crossed, waiting. He stepped out of the car, meeting her gaze. "Told you I'd come back." Eden shook her head, but there was laughter in her eyes. "You really gave up everything." Felix climbed the steps, stopping just inches from her. "Not everything," he murmured. "Just the things that didn't matter." Eden's breath caught, and then, before either of them could say another word, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that left no room for doubt. Felix pulled her close, deepening the kiss, pouring every ounce of certainty into it. And when they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, breathing in the scent of her, the warmth of her, the life he had chosen. "I love you," he said simply. Eden exhaled, her fingers gripping his shirt. "I love you too." And just like that, Felix Montgomery, the man who had built an empire, found something worth more than all the wealth in the world. Hers, and he wasn't going anywhere.